Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 531 Human Leader, Zombie Leader, Beast Leader, Sea Princess, Fatal War, Part 5 Last. The mermaid at the top of the wave had a strange charm, one that Bai Zemin and Shangyun Bingshu were not used to dealing with. She not only had a beautiful face and a sculpted curvaceous body, but because of her tail and the shimmering blue scales that covered part of her arms, she had a touch of exotic beauty that was too alluring to take one's eyes off her. However, the gaze of Bai Zemin only lingered for a second on the mermaid's body, before moving to the creature riding the wave right next to her, and when he saw this creature, he not only tensed slightly, but the murderous intent within him exploded in such a way that everyone on the bridge felt it. This was because the creature standing next to the mermaid was none other than the little ape who not long ago had been thrown into the sea by the alligator in an attempt to save its master from Bai Zemin's fatal attack. In fact, Bai Zemin knew that the little ape was still alive despite having fallen into the water. After all, the little ape was the leader of the beasts, and if it wasn't because it was sending orders by unknown means, the other unintelligent beasts would have definitely started to kill themselves and fight against the zombies, instead of simply attacking the sea life. It was just that Bai Zemin did not expect the little ape to suddenly appear with a mermaid coming from the deep sea, and from what he could see, it seemed that they were in some sort of alliance as well. Bai Zemin did not understand why the mermaid, who clearly had great prestige among the sea creatures, would join forces with the leader of the beasts. After all, so far, the beasts and zombies had joined hands to slaughter the sea creatures. However, even though Bai Zemin didn't understand too much of what was going on, he didn't care either. Since that was the way things were, he would probably be forced to use overlap regeneration again. This would place a heavy burden on his currently wounded soul, but Bai Zemin would rather wound his soul more deeply than let himself be hunted alive and die. Besides, he was not alone here. Shangyun Bingshu would die if he did not have such determination. The battlefield on the bridge had become silent when the mermaid made her appearance, as from the moment the sea creatures jumped into the water, the zombie beast alliance lost their targets to fight against. The mermaid that had appeared was the 7th princess of the Eastern Sea race, and her name was Xietain. The first thing she did after arriving on the surface was to observe the battlefield, and somehow what she saw confused her. However, that confusion slowly turned into anger as the blue eyes of Xietain flashed with chilling light at the sight of the corpses of so many soldiers of her race. Just as the 7th princess clenched her magic staff so tightly that her knuckles turned white without a trace of blood, a chilling aura enveloped the area and forced her back to her senses. The mermaid princess was slightly surprised to notice the spine-chilling look the male human was giving her, but when out of the corner of her eye, she saw the little ape, she naturally understood everything. Mermaids were a legendary race, and there were many theories regarding this mythological race that had haunted human myths and legends since ancient times. In some myths, mermaids were creepy creatures that sang beautiful songs to cause ships to crash into each other and sink to the bottom of the ocean, or to lure fishermen with their charm. In other myths, mermaids were extremely beautiful and shy beings that hid in maritime areas unreachable for mankind. However, all these myths had something in common, and that was that mermaids were undoubtedly extremely intelligent creatures. The mermaid princess looked at the zombie leader who was gasping for air and noticed that one of his tentacles was nowhere to be seen, his body was riddled with wounds, and one of his legs was gone. Then, she looked at the human male, and then looked at the human female, before her gaze settled on the male again, as while both were tremendously powerful, it was clear that the leader between the two was the male. The mermaid princess suddenly looked down at the sea below her and shouted words in a language that none of those present could understand. Her voice was gentle, but at the same time had a slight tinge of natural arrogance, similar to that of a person from a wealthy family, yet charming and pleasant to listen to. Swoosh! The sea opened up and a new wave rose. On top of the wave, the second-order shark man who had been fighting to the death against 2 zombie commanders at the same time before Shangyun Bingshu took one for herself emerged. The body of the shark man was riddled with wounds, and the dark blue blood flowing out of his body seemed to be fighting against something as the visible flesh occasionally twisted. Bai Zemin and Shangyun Bingshu noticed that deep in the flesh of the shark man were strange purple rashes that began to slowly grow. It was probably the product of some venomous skill or some side effect of the zombie's natural infection. The shark man knelt on his right knee and lowered his head. His loud and clear voice rang out, and even though no one could understand what he was saying, the respectful tone in his voice had laid bare to Bai Zemin and Shangyun Bingshu that the beautiful mermaid had great status among the sea creatures. The beautiful mermaid and the shark man were talking for almost 2 whole minutes. mostly, and even though no one could understand the content of the conversation, it seemed to be that the mermaid was asking questions, as the shark man occasionally nodded his head and looked towards the bridge, pointing to some places and looking at the zombies and beasts with anger in his big eyes. After about 120 seconds, the mermaid seemed to have gotten the information she was looking for, as she simply nodded and, with a wave of her hands, said something to the shark man. The shark man lowered his head in shame and, after bowing to the mermaid, looked at the zombie commander with murderous intent before sinking back into the waters and disappearing without a trace. "Sea Princess, since you are here, why don't you honor our agreement and help us kill this human?" The zombie leader looked at the beautiful mermaid with his red eyes and inquired in a deep voice. The little ape, before the mermaid could say anything, stomped on the wave it was standing on and fell back onto the bridge. The little creature looked at Xietain with bloodshot eyes, as a deep bloody wound littered its chest, probably the place where the second-order alligator had struck earlier. A blue-colored pearl that was embedded in the skin of the mermaid's forehead glowed faintly, and she opened her plump lips. For the first time, Xietain and Shangyun Bingshu understood the words of this beautiful sea creature. "You dare to ask me questions?" Princess Xietain said. Although her voice was gentle, the hidden anger could not go unnoticed from those who had taken the lives of hundreds of thousands of living beings, which was why the zombie leader knew that the seventh princess was displeased. "Your zombie race, the beast race, and my sea race. Our three races had reached a clear agreement," Xietain said as her whole body trembled and she struggled to contain her anger and frustration. "In exchange for helping you kill a human and destroy his forces, you would deliver sacrifices to my subordinates. However, what happened here? You formed an alliance, and over 10,000 of my precious subordinates were mercilessly killed. If you don't give me an explanation today, then none of you will be able to leave this place safe and sound." The anger of the seventh princess seemed to be felt by the sea, as dozens of waves hundreds of meters long began to agitate. From the distance, giant tsunamis could be seen rising and dying in the same spot over and over again, creating an extremely terrifying image. The zombie leader was already angry after being humiliated and beaten by the attacks of the human, so when the princess threatened him, his anger naturally did not let him think rationally about the consequences of continuing to offend her. Fortunately, the little ape was able to keep its mind compass despite its inner rage. The little beast stepped forward and said in a high-pitched voice, "Sea Princess, I can assure you that we will give you an apology for this. I am even willing to offer 100,000 unclassified beasts for you to feed your populace. However, before that happens, would you mind helping us to kill these two humans?" The little ape pointed at Xietain and said seriously, "Especially the male. That human must die, or else in the future there will be no room for us in China." The mermaid princess might not be aware of how terrifying the human known as Xietain was, but the little ape and the zombie leader knew it perfectly well. Despite having fought for 48 hours without any rest, despite having slaughtered nearly 10 million zombies, despite having fought and killed several second-order enemies, Xietain still had enough power to overwhelm the little ape and the zombie leader in such a way that they both ended up in miserable states under his physical and magical attacks. "HMPH. The seventh princess snorted and said with ridicule and disdain, "Xietain might be nothing more than a second-order mermaid. However, this princess stands out as being very clever. Do you think you can fool me, beast leader? You and the zombie leader clearly joined hands to fight that human and were still defeated. It's because you somehow expected this to happen that 3 days ago you requested my help, isn't it?" The little ape frowned, and the face of the zombie leader sank. Neither of them liked where things were heading. Xietain decided to seize the opportunity, and using the information he had managed to gather from this short discussion, he said in a deep voice, "Mermaid Princess, if you forge an alliance with me, I will offer you an even better deal than the one these two offered you." Xietain looked at the human standing on the bridge from a superior position. She asked with apparent interest, "And what do you have to offer, human leader?" Xietain narrowed his eyes, and his eyes flashed strangely as he listened to the way the sea princess referred to him. After thinking about it for a moment, Xietain slowly said, "It seems that you need food for your subordinates. Although I don't know your motives nor do I understand the situation under the seas, it is clear that you and your race have your own problems just like all of us here, so how about this? After murdering everyone here, I, Xietain, swear to give up 30% of all the zombies here, as well as 50% of the beasts present." 30%? 50%? The mermaid princess sneered. "The beast leader is wounded, the zombie leader's battle power dropped below 70%, and you, human leader, are clearly exhausted. As for the woman next to you, even though she is strong, she definitely won't be able to fight against me and my subordinates. I can take whatever I want right now. Why in the world would I accept a deal like this? That's because if you reject my offer, I'm afraid that you and all your subordinates will be sent to the bottomless abyss from which you will never be able to get out, Xietain said in a cold voice. The blue eyes of Xietain flashed with chilling coldness, and the murderous intent in her began to grow. Just as Shangyuan Bingshu was beginning to grow anxious, Xietain continued. Over 7 million zombies fell into the sea, regardless of whether they were alive or not. Your race devoured them, and with it also took large amounts of soul stones. Giving you 30% of the 6 million that are here is my limit. As for the percentage of beasts, my human race needs them too, so the percentage is out of the question. However, in return, I can give you the corpse of a third-order existence. Xietain noticed that the mermaid princess's eyes shone brightly when she heard his last words, and his lips curved imperceptibly upwards. What do you think, Your Highness? Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 532. Entering into an alliance with the mermaid princess Xietain. Xietain was not being a coward, far from it, in trying to offer an alliance to the seventh princess. On the contrary, he was being extremely careful with this matter and trying to handle it with his head as level-headed as possible. Xietain was a proud person even before the apocalypse broke out in the world. With the arrival of the soul record on Earth, he did not know the reason why he was always proud and even slightly arrogant. After all, Xietain was only the son of a truck driver and an elementary school teacher, and even though his grades were always excellent, he was aware that his pride seemed to come from deep inside him for unknown reasons. However, the pride of Xietain grew explosively when the mana of the world flowed into his body. With the attainment of skills such as God of War's will, and under the constant praise of a not only beautiful but tremendously powerful woman like Lilith, Xietain slowly grew into an existence that would not allow anyone to try to step on him, and if anyone ever tried to take advantage of him, he would definitely make them pay 1,000 times the price. Until now, the only reason he could keep his calm in most situations was due to his passive skill Stoneheart. In this situation, Stoneheart helped Xietain once again, as it was a skill that, apart from suppressing his emotions to others, also helped him to keep his mind somewhat cooler than usual when the situation warranted it. The current situation was far from ideal, and Xietain was perfectly aware of this fact. His stamina stat had fallen below half, his soul was wounded, causing his battle power to drop by 10%. His mind was exhausted, which clouded his senses. His slightly numb body, due to having done nothing but fight for so many hours on the run, was causing his reaction speed to plummet, and many more. Xietain was confident that even with his current situation, he could defeat the zombie leader and the beast leader. However, if to these two third-order beings was added a mermaid princess, which despite being only a peak second-order existence for some reason, gave him a slight feeling of danger, then Xietain could no longer guarantee his victory 100%. If the mermaid princess joined the zombie leader and the beast leader, unless Xietain was willing to destroy the bridge and risk his life, his best option would be making a run for it. After all, activating Crimson Blood Judgment in the middle of the sea would destroy the bridge, and he would lose his foothold, which would eventually lead to him being surrounded by countless sea beasts. All of this was even without taking into account the fact that Shangyuan Bingshu was there. While she was undoubtedly a powerful and proficient warrior and mage, she probably wouldn't be able to fight the mermaid princess long enough for Xietain to finish off at least one of his enemies. Therefore, he needed to prevent the mermaid princess from joining hands with the zombie leader and the beast leader at all costs. Only then would Xietain be able to prevent the destruction of the bridge, but more than anything else, only in this way could Xietain prevent his life from being plunged into danger at the same time, as he would end up preventing Shangyuan Bingshu from probably dying. Now that Xietain knew that for unknown reasons the mermaid princess needed food for her subordinates, then he would take advantage of this fact. Delivering several million zombie corpses was not a loss to him, and the only thing that hurt him was the loss of the possible tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of soul stones that could be found in their heads. But since Xietain was not an all-powerful being capable of moving through the heavens and earth freely, he had to be prepared to sacrifice some things for the greater good. At least until the moment he had the power to control all destiny in his hands, Xietain would have to be willing to give up some things to gain others. That was life. When we chose one path, we often gave up another. In fact, that was how the soul record worked as well. Indeed, when he mentioned the corpse of a third-order existence, the mermaid princess was immediately tempted. The zombie leader and the little ape naturally noticed the strange glint in the mermaid princess's gaze when she looked at them. It was as if she was looking at two shiny gold coins waiting to be collected. "Sea princess, are you going to break your word? Is this how your sea race does business?" The little ape took a step forward and shouted noisily in panic. Things were already very tight, and no one knew who could win. If the mermaid princess joined forces with a monster like Xietain, then these two leaders would probably have no hope of getting out of here alive. However, the little ape did not know that his words were all it took for Xietain to make her decision. "Break my word?" said the mermaid princess in a low voice. She looked at both the little ape and the zombie leader with disdain and sneered. "The ones who broke their word were you, yet you dare to besmirch the name of my race? I really must be blind for forming an alliance with an ape and a strange creature like you two." Bang! The mana burst out of the mermaid princess's body, and in response, the sea 5 kilometers around responded with what seemed to be a ferocious bestial roar. "Human leader? I accept your offer. We'll discuss the details later. For now, let's get this over with once and for all." Under the stupefied eyes of Xietain and Shangyun Bingshu, as well as the furious and disbelieving gaze of the zombie leader and the little ape, the mermaid princess waved her staff, and her voice traveled several kilometers into the deep sea. "Attack?" Maybe it was because of the glowing blue pearl embedded in the mermaid princess's forehead, but this time, everyone understood what she said. In return, thousands of waves of different sizes rose up with noisy bangs. The night sky seemed to be covered by several layers of water for a brief moment, and as these layers of water began to descend, the moonlight illuminated the terror approaching the bridge. At least a few 100,000 sea creatures leaped out of the waters in the direction of the bridge. There were fish, there were lobsters, there were crabs, there were seaweeds, sea lice, etc. At very least 30 different species of sea creatures planted their feet firmly on the bridge, creating a noisy boom. Xietain and Shangyun Bingshu were amazed when the sea creatures did not take long at all to show up, as once they arrived on the bridge they immediately got to work. Following the mermaid princess's orders to the very letter, the creatures from the sea charged like an angry wave towards the army of the Zombie Beast Alliance. The numbers between the two armies were disproportional in great magnitude. One side had over 6 million, while the other side had just over 500,000. Moreover, the side that had numerical superiority was also fighting on solid ground, which gave them even more of a natural advantage over the army, whose total was more than 10 times smaller in comparison. However, despite being outnumbered and despite the fact that the place in which they were fighting was not advantageous in any way, the sea creatures proved to be terrifying to the point that even Xietain wished that mankind would not have to face them in the near future, and if possible never. The fish over a meter tall that were unclassified existences were barely over level 10, but their teeth were so powerful that even a level 15 defense-focused beast would be split in half. The unclassified crabs and unclassified lobsters with their powerful pincers had the ability to break the defense of any first-order zombie that was not careful and fell into their clutches. But the most terrifying were the sea lice. These ugly creatures numbered over 200,000 and were nothing more than level 5 unclassified existences, but their special characteristic was that they always followed the leading organism, which was level 15. The leading sea lice would attack, and like magnets with opposite poles attracting each other, they would immediately attack the same target. In a matter of a few seconds, most of their enemies were turned into a pile of bones. These previously small sea lice had grown to over 20 centimeters each, while some of them were over 30 centimeters long, the leader being a creature over 50 centimeters long. While such sizes were insignificant when compared to any of the other living creatures on the bridge, the fact that they all attacked together was simply horrifying. The same shark man from before also seemed to be called by the mermaid princess, as Xietain heard him yelling something in a language he could not understand. The shark man charged towards the zombie commander with decisiveness, and immediately both existences created their own battlefield where they became entangled in a deadly battle. Only a couple of seconds passed, but the top of the bridge became a slaughterhouse filled with bestial roars and shrieks. Although the sea race was temporarily at a disadvantage, it seemed that given enough time they would be able to turn the tide with their own efforts and sheer tenacity. "You bastard bitch!" The lead zombie roared in anger and suddenly made a move that left Xietain a little at a loss for words. The creature tore off half of his single tentacle and brought the severed half to the leg that Xietain had cut off with his spear just before the mermaid princess made her appearance. Then, something breathtaking happened. "So that's how that monster managed to recover," Xietain muttered as he watched the severed tentacle join the severed flesh of the leg of the zombie leader. A strange purple light glowed above the tentacle, disintegrating it in a second. Then, that light entered the flesh of the severed leg, and a moment later a completely healthy new leg was born. Xietain had always wondered how it was possible for the zombie leader to recover from the deadly wound he had inflicted. After all, unlike any kind of regenerative skill, the only wound that had healed on the body of the zombie leader was the mortal wound of the torso that had been almost completely torn off and the internal organs destroyed. Now, the doubt had finally been cleared. However, Xietain now had a new doubt, and it was how would the zombie leader fight now that he had lost his two upper limbs. Soon, this doubt was cleared up as well as the other. Sacrifice? The zombie leader roared towards the sky and activated a skill. Flash, 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 flash. Blackish-purple lights illuminated the bodies of over 2 million zombies. Moments later, a large part of the bridge was suddenly vacated, as those zombies that were being surrounded by the blackish-purple light disappeared without a trace. This caused the pressure on the sea creatures to be greatly relieved, and at the same time, the zombies and beasts felt the terror of the sea creatures even more strongly. All that blackish-purple light flew to the places where the tentacles of the zombie leader should be, giving shape to something that was soon revealed. Swoosh, swoosh. The corner of Xietan's mouth twitched a couple of times as he saw two new shiny black tentacles bleeding on the leading zombie's body. A third-order existence really is too difficult to deal with. He sighed in his heart. The eyes of the zombie leader flashed with a hint of exhaustion after activating his skill sacrifice. However, the weariness was being fought by the anger he felt, so he pointed at the mermaid princess and roared, "I'll take care of catching you, and by the time that happens I'll eat your body piece by piece, while leaving your consciousness intact." HMPH. Xietain didn't look convinced. Despite being a second-order existence, this mermaid princess was actually brave, and with a swing of her magic staff, the mana inside her body began to tremble in response to her magic power. "Come, zombie leader," she said in a cold voice. "I will finish you before the sun rises." From tonight onwards, zombies from all over this district will be left without a permanent leader. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 533. The human who will one day rule over the universe. "After I'm done with you, let me see if you can continue with that arrogance of yours," shouted the zombie leader in anger, and ignoring whatever the little ape had said, he stomped on the bridge with such force that the ice floor Shangyuan Bingshu had created to support Xietan's blood barrier practically cracked all the way through. The mermaid princess snorted in retaliation to the aggressive outburst of the zombie leader. The gemstone on the top of her magic staff released a faint blue glow, and the large wave beneath her body receded at the same time as Xietain waved her staff. Her soft voice resounded in the middle of the night. "Water dragon!" Bang! The sea exploded as the waters gathered, and in an instant a beast over 300 meters long and over 30 meters tall took shape. Although the creature was just pure water, the power of a true flood dragon seemed to emanate from its silhouette, and as it soared skyward in pursuit of the advancing zombie leader, the air began to blast repeatedly due to the pressure caused. Scram! The zombie leader roared and lashed his two hardened tentacles forward, using them as whips to lacerate the body of his enemy. The water dragon let out a low roar in response, and using the momentum with which it came out of the water, swung its long tail straight ahead. Boom! The waves rose up, forming a beautiful but terrifying natural phenomenon as the shockwave spread out with the point of impact as its center. The water dragon and the zombie leader seemed to freeze for a moment in mid-flight, but that stagnation was soon broken as the zombie leader was sent flying in such a way that his body only stopped once he extended and enlarged his right tentacle to cling tightly to one of the pillars of the bridge. On the other hand, the water dragon exploded and turned into millions of tiny water droplets that shot up into the sky before falling swiftly back into the sea, creating small ripples of water. It was clear that although the water dragon looked quite majestic, at the end of the day, it was just a skill that belonged to the mermaid princess. Unless the mermaid princess was tremendously more powerful than the zombie leader or her skill was at very high stages, it was completely normal for the water dragon to be destroyed by the attack of an enraged third-order creature. However, Xietain did not panic at all. She kept her distance from the bridge, and using the now more than 500 meters high wave, she chanted one more time, "Water dragon!" Bang! Again, an oriental dragon made of pure water came out of the sea and charged towards the bridge. However, this was not all, as the mermaid princess waved her staff, and as the mana in her body fluttered, she activated a second skill. Electrified body? The voice of Xietain had only fallen as countless lightning flashes of different sizes surrounded and began to dance over the water dragon's body. The night sky lit up, and from a distance the bright gold-colored light could be seen illuminating the sky vault. The lead zombie roared and with a strong kick launched himself forward again. Boom, boom. This time, even after 2 powerful blows, the zombie leader failed to destroy the water dragon, despite forcing it back with the first attack and sending it flying with the second one. However, it was clear that the zombie leader was also having his own difficulties, as sparks of golden lightning flashed over his 2 tentacles, causing his muscles to slightly atrophy. Human leader, you don't need to stand there watching. The voice of the mermaid princess traveled to the bridge, successfully reaching Xietain. Even though I am just a second-order existence in the sea, there is no way a filthy third-order beast that only advanced using strange means can defeat me. The voice of Xietain not only sounded confident, but also contained a tinge of ridicule, clearly directed towards the zombie leader. However, regardless of the content of her message, this served to soothe Xietain. Although Xietain did not care whether the mermaid princess died or not, he hoped that she would be able to restrain the zombie leader at least long enough for him to inflict major wounds on the beast leader, or even kill it. Otherwise, things would once again become very difficult for him, more so considering the zombie leader's sacrifice skill that allowed him to sacrifice zombies in exchange for regenerating his body. "I'll go help you when I'm done here," Xietain shouted back. Xietain did not respond and instead continued to create water creatures using her magic. Every time one was destroyed, she simply waved her staff and spawned a new one. Sometimes, the mermaid princess would even become daring enough to empower her water monsters with other skills, such as electrified body, ancient endurance, royal blessing, etc. The zombie leader, despite being clearly a lot stronger, had no way of reaching the mermaid princess, as his skill of extending his tentacles only had a range of 300 meters at present, and because of the water summons that repeatedly obstructed his route, the zombie leader was unable to reach Xietain. Xietain was not stupid. She knew that in a face-to-face confrontation against the zombie leader, her defeat would be a matter of time. Therefore, she backed off when she needed to back off and moved forward when she found the opportunity. Using her ability to summon artificial creatures from the sea, Xietain managed to keep the zombie leader at bay, while slowly draining his stamina and mana, which were currently quite low after the creature used sacrifice. Seeing that the mermaid princess seemed to be able to fight against the zombie leader without too much trouble, Xietain let out a sigh of relief in his heart. His cold eyes moved to the little ape that was muttering continuously things that neither Xietain nor Xietain Bingshu could hear from a distance. Xietain frowned and took a step forward. His murderous intent was completely released from his body, and an intangible crimson aura seemed to take shape around his silhouette. This was the result of having slaughtered and ended the lives of so many existences in such a short time. "You have learned." Again, leaving the records obtained for later, Xietain looked at the little ape and said in a chilling voice, "Stop babbling, little rat. It's you and me now, with no one intervening." The little ape ignored Xietain and instead continued muttering under its breath, "How is this possible? How is this possible? How is this possible?" Xietain Bingshu approached Xietain and whispered, "What do you want me to do?" Xietain gave her a sidelong glance before turning his gaze to the front and whispering, "Stay alert. I feel something is not right, but I can't infer what it is." Xietain Bingshu's blue eyes flashed and she nodded sternly after hearing what he said. "Leave it to me," she said softly. As she looked at his serious profile from the side, she added, "Go and fight without worrying about anything but your own well-being." Xietain smiled slightly in return before stomping hard on the ice floor that enveloped part of his blood barrier and protected the bridge. Bang! The wind generated by the explosion at the sudden movement caused Xietain Bingshu's flowing hair to dance under the glare of the moonlight, and even though Xietan's silhouette was but a blur in her eyes, she seemed to be able to see him since in her pupils the only thing reflected was him. The little ape naturally sensed mortal danger from the moment Xietain focused his gaze on him, a danger which escalated to colossal levels once he lunged forward to start the fight. "How the hell did this happen?" The little ape roared in a high-pitched voice as its magical power went berserk. The response of Xietain was to stab forward with his golden spear directly between the beast leader's eyes. The little ape roared skyward, and a tremendous wind blast formed a kind of dome that quickly spread outward, growing larger and larger. Boom! Xietan's spear hit the huge wind barrier, and a thunderous explosion caused the entire bridge to rumble. The wind barrier shattered after withstanding the impact and stopping Xietan's charge. Thousands of wind blades indiscriminately slashed the ice floor, the blood barrier, and even took the lives of several hundred of the creatures fighting their own war on top of the bridge. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. The little ape stretched his hands skyward, and a dark cloud 100 meters wide and 400 meters long formed out of thin air. The beast leader looked at Xietain with bloodshot eyes and roared, "Today, I was supposed to fulfill my wish to take your life. My plan was perfect." Bang, 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 bang. Purple lightning flashed around the dark cloud, and Xietain barely had time to react when a lightning flash as thick as a vehicle fell from the sky, with the intention of striking him. Xietain merely snorted coldly, and when the purple lightning came into range of his spear, he simply stabbed out at a strange angle. Boom! The lightning exploded as the spear tip slammed against it, and small snakes of lightning scattered through the air, illuminating the surroundings for a brief fraction of a second before disappearing. But it was not all. After the first lightning flash struck and was destroyed, a second one descended from the sky. Then a third, a fourth, a fifth, 6, 7 more than 1,000 violet lightning flashes descended from the sky, with short margins between them. The sight from the distance was magnificent as well as terrifying. The golden radiance and the purple shine intermingled with each other to form a kind of artificial aurora in the sky that looked beautiful, despite the danger that approaching it represented. Were it not for the thunderous explosions and bestial roars that could be heard even more than 50 kilometers away, and were it not for the world being as it was, many would probably have approached the eastern dragon's back in search of answers. Xietain lashed out with his spear. Sometimes he would stab, sometimes he would swing, sometimes he would even use the back of his weapon to finish off some lightning. All of this seemed to be a simple thing for him. It was as if the elemental skill of the little ape was nothing more than a joke in his eyes, as the expression of Xietain remained impassive at all moments. Why? The little ape roared as it leaped skyward and stretched both hands forward. Why don't my magic attacks work on you? Why are you so strong? You're just a human. Your body should be weak and your talent shouldn't be so high. What the heck are you? Xietain, annoyed with the little ape's strange behavior, suddenly tensed the muscles in his arms and legs. With a fierce stab forward and not holding back his strength stat at all, a thunderous explosion followed by a huge air cannon propelled by annihilation of the falling sky, flew into the sky, struck the black cloud from which the lightning flashes fell without pause. Boom! The cloud dissipated on the spot, and as a consequence all the lightning flashes it contained also dispersed across the sky, vanishing without a trace a moment later. Xietain swung his spear around his body before pointing the tip at the ape that was holding itself in the air, using the gusts of wind to its advantage. "Looks like you've been observing me? Oh well, never mind that." His cold voice reached skyward, and with indifference, he emphasized, "Regardless of your motives, and regardless of the reason behind your strange behavior towards me, from the moment you decided to be my enemy you were destined to fall. You ask who am I? Let me answer that question before I kill you." Blue lightning flashes crackled over the body of Xietain at the activation of lightning movement. The power of crimson flame immediately encircled his spear, and as he leaned his body slightly forward in preparation for what seemed to be an imminent leap, he said coldly, "I am the human who will one day rule this universe. You shouldn't feel bad now that you know who I am, should you?" His voice was arrogant and proud, and even the mermaid princess and the zombie leader fighting in the distance heard it. However, neither of them felt anything but ridicule in their hearts. However, the same could not be said of the little ape. The little ape felt for some reason that what the human before him had just said were not mere words but facts. And this chilled its blood because it had a very special skill attached to its soul. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 534 Magic Ignition. Bang! The little ape did not have time to think things over, nor was it given time to feel surprised or stupefied, because after saying such extravagant words, Xietain stomped on the ground beneath his feet and turned into a flash of golden light, charging straight up into the sky and soaring more than 1,000 meters in the blink of an eye. However, just like a corralled rat, the fear of the little ape began to turn into anger, and with a vicious glint in its eye, it roared sharply, "Don't underestimate me, human." The mana inside the body of the little ape surged like a torrent in such a way that even Xietain felt small for a second. It was more than clear that the amount of mana the little ape had inside its body was without a doubt considerably higher than Xietan's total mana. If one were to take into account that Xietan's mana statistic could be compared to an early third-order existence, then the little ape's mana could be compared to a middle or perhaps late third-order existence, and this was so even though the little ape was barely level 101. Xietain did not respond to the roar of the little ape, at least, not verbally. All he did was stab forward with his spear as his eyes tried to anticipate where the next magic attack would be launched. However, nothing was easy when it came to facing a third-order existence, and that was multiplied infinitely when it came to facing an existence of such magnitude while you were 2 stages below. Magic ignition? When such words reached the senses of Xietain, all the hairs on his body suddenly stood on end, and out of pure instinct, he activated gravity manipulation, increasing the gravity around him 15 times, and causing the course he was moving on to change in an instant. Boom! The space around the little ape shuddered ferociously, as if the world was trying to warn about the difficulty it was experiencing in withstanding such pressure. However, how could the little ape care about such things? At this moment, the beast leader wanted nothing more than to tear the human in front of it into 1,000 pieces, even if the price was its own life. After using blood manipulation to control several blood chains that coiled around his body and led him back to the bridge, Xietain frowned, and a glint of worry flashed in his gaze as he looked up at the sky. For a moment, even the battle of the mermaid princess and the zombie leader came to a halt as both existences looked skyward with shock in their eyes. The body of the little ape was surrounded by a faint red light, and while using the natural and magic air currents to its advantage in order to stay floating, the beast leader felt a scorching energy burning in its abdomen, even though there was no flame at all. Magic ignition. This was a third-order skill that had mutated after the little ape found a treasure in the middle of the forest, a treasure which also helped it to lower the difficulty of its evolution requirements from second order to third order. Of course, the consequence had been that before reaching level 150, the little ape would only be able to use 90% of the power of a true third-order existence, and even after reaching level 150, the purity of its soul power could no longer be the same. Magic ignition was an advanced self-polishing skill that after reaching third order could not evolve any further. This was its limit. As an advanced skill, the effect was naturally outstanding. However, any increase in power that was not natural to the soul or body had its own consequences, and, as the name suggested, magic ignition was a skill that burned the little ape's magic power. For the little ape, the mana cost of all elemental skills doubled in addition to consuming 2 mana points every 4 seconds. The duration was only 3 minutes, while the cooldown of magic ignition was 6 months. In addition, magic ignition would cause a colossal 30% decrease in the stats health, stamina, strength, mana, and an even worse 70% in magic for 180 days. However, for such a severe punishment, there were naturally high-grade rewards. Magic ignition was a skill that increased the power of elemental skills plus 300%. It also increased the magic stat plus 50%, and the casting speed of magic skills plus 100%. A skill that granted the user overwhelming godlike power for a short 3 minutes in exchange for practically leaving said user on the verge of death for half a year. The little ape roared to the sky as a huge fireball formed above its head. The little ape needed nothing more than to kill the human on the bridge. Everything else was insignificant in its eyes. The fireball started out as just that, a fireball. However, in a matter of blinks of an eye, that fireball transformed into a sphere of fire over 100 meters in diameter that at the same speed continued growing. 200 meters, 300 meters, 400 meters, 500 meters, 600 meters. The darkness was completely erased from the surroundings by the illumination of the flames, and the seawater began to evaporate so fast that 3,000 meters around a kind of concave hole appeared in the middle of the water. As the water spun in the form of a spiral, a fierce whirlpool of water that the ships were so afraid of began to take shape. As the water began to disappear so quickly, the surrounding sea began to spin counterclockwise, and had it not been for the fact that most of the surrounding sea creatures were on top of the bridge, they would have been torn apart by the pressure in the center of the swirling water. The sphere of fire did not stop expanding and soon reached 1,000 meters in diameter. At the same time, the whirlpool of water had grown to a beast of over 5,000 meters in diameter. Xietain had difficulty to control the water wave she was resting on, and even though she was doing her best, the heat of the fire sphere was such that all she was succeeding in doing was preventing the water around her from disappearing. The power of the sea creatures plummeted, and at the terror of the fire energy gathering in the sky above their heads, many of them began to shriek and roar. Had it not been for the mermaid princess's command to them being absolute, these creatures would have definitely jumped into the water in an attempt to get away from the heat, which would end their lives as the swirling water would tear them apart immediately. Swoosh! Shangyuan Bingshu slaughtered all the enemies that got in her way, and in just 2 seconds, she arrived at Bai Zemin's side after having opened a path of blood by herself. And now what? she asked in a cold voice while in her blue eyes reflected a huge slightly orange circle with shades of yellow of varying magnitudes. Xietain did not respond immediately, he was weighing the pros and cons of each possible action. However, Xietain knew that first of all he needed to do something or else the bridge would soon be destroyed. Rumble. Indeed, even though the magic attack had not been launched and had not touched the bridge at all, the tremendous pressure that the swirling water 200 meters below was so great that the gravity in the area increased considerably. If not for the blood barrier and ice ground that Xietain and Shangyuan Bingshu had prepared, this bridge that had been built with normal post-apocalypse materials would have already collapsed. Bingshu. Xietain called out in a serious voice. As he looked at the little ape, his eyes flashed strangely. Days ago, you told me that the second activation of your ice maker skill allowed you to create traps which would activate only when you wanted them to, didn't you? Yes? Shangyuan Bingshu said somewhat uncertainly as she did not understand what Xietain was getting at. After all, it was absolutely impossible for her ice maker skill to be of any use in this kind of situation. Explain to me how it works, hurry. Xietain pushed as he noticed that after reaching 1800 meters in diameter, the expansion speed of what now looked like a fire plant slowed down. From where Xietain and the rest were standing, all they could see was fire as the sky was completely covered by the magic skill of the little ape. It was more than clear that the beast leader wanted to die with everyone here, as it was even ignoring the zombie leader's shouts and curses. No one dared to approach the little ape to stop it. While it was possible to kill it, it was more likely that the magic power of the surroundings would turn anyone into a pile of bloody pulp. In addition, thin black lines continuously appeared in the environment as proof that the spatial barrier of the world had no way to handle this pressure. Shangyuan Bingshu quickly gave him a summary of how the second activation of her ice maker skill worked, and once Xietain understood the scenario he realized that his plan was plausible. Bingshu, make for me a temporary magic circle with an ice pillar at least 2,000 meters high. Can you do that? Even though such a huge pillar will consume practically 70% of my remaining mana, it is possible, she said after thinking about it for a second. Then, Shangyuan Bingshu closed her eyes and focused on her skill. Xietain looked at her out of the corner of his eye and noticed that on her beautiful face, that seemed to be made of porcelain like that of a doll, the beads of sweat were moving tantalizingly. The temperature of the area had reached at least 200 degrees Celsius, and more than 60% of the sea creatures had died. Of course, zombies and beasts had also suffered. The beasts to a lesser extent thanks to their powerful physical bodies, but they were fewer in number to begin with, so there were only around 10,000 creatures standing alive right now. Were it not for the fact that they were all 50 kilometers away from the mainland, and were it not for the fact that the night winds in the middle of the sea were extremely fierce and cold, the forests would have caught fire at the slightest contact with this kind of environment. Xietain took a deep breath, and the seductive fragrance of a female body sweating clouded his senses for a fraction of a second before he regained his composure. Just then, Shangyuan Bingshu opened her eyes and looked straight at him. She extended her small hand forward and calmly said, "Here." Xietain looked down and saw a 5-centimeter diameter ice circle enclosed by countless small unreadable magic runes that joined together to form strange lines. The magic power coming from the small circle was considerable in comparison to its size. Xietain took the ice circle in his left hand and then said something to Shangyuan Bingshu, using a voice that only he and she could hear. She looked at him in confusion, but her confusion was soon swept away by her preoccupation. Shangyuan Bingshu hesitated for a moment before softly saying, "You take care." Xietain stared at her for a moment before smiling and saying in a joking tone, "Do you want a bye-bye kiss? Do you want to die?" Shangyuan Bingshu replied calmly as she tidied up a section of her hair. I'm sorry, but no. I still have many things I want to do." Xietain laughed out loud, and while looking at the almost finished huge magic attack with narrowed eyes, he said with a hint of determination, "I have so many things to accomplish, so many people trust me that I can die." Then, he looked at Shangyuan Bingshu and said arrogantly, "Don't look at me being so handsome and charming. If I am honest, I never had a girlfriend. My standards are too high after all." Shangyuan Bingshu glared at him before bursting out laughing. She laughed loudly, so loudly that in the middle of the stony silence, the beautiful sound of her laughter traveled far and wide for all to hear. "Maybe you haven't had a girlfriend because you haven't been able to get one?" she joked in between laughter and tears. "Who told you about it?" Hearing Xietan's bitter tone, Shangyuan Bingshu laughed even louder. The two of them, far from worrying about the seemingly horrible situation they were in, joke with each other like two old friends who had just reunited after years of being apart. Even when death is imminent, can you laugh? Let me see how much more you can continue smiling. A roar charged with anger and pain resounded, practically completely suppressing the beautiful laughter of Shangyuan Bingshu. Looking up at the sky, the eyes of Bai Zemin met the rabid eyes of the beast leader, who seemed to want to devour his flesh, drink his blood, and scatter his ashes, until no trace of him remained. Where did all this hatred come from? Where did this pain come from? Bai Zemin could not understand the reason why the little ape was willing to go so far as to create such a suicidal attack. Bai Zemin racked his brain to the point where it hurt, but no matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't come up with a possible answer. Bai Zemin had gone so far as to think of silly reasons such as, could it be that this little ape was my pet and I abandoned it years ago, so now that the world evolved it is releasing its anger on me? After all, in many novels this kind of trope happened frequently. However, he never had a pet monkey, so such a thing could not be possible. Such was the degree of Bai Zemin's confusion. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 535. Death is the fate of those who are blinded by power. Even when death is imminent, can you laugh? Let me see how much more you can continue smiling. Bai Zemin returned the little ape's cold stare, and instead of replying to the creature, what he did was to look briefly at Shangyuan Bingshu and say in a low voice, "Remember my words." Then, after seeing her nod towards him with a serious expression on her face, Bai Zemin did something unexpected. His body seemed to flash due to his high movement speed, and in an instant he crossed 200 meters, reaching the end of one of the widths of the bridge. Then, with a stomp that not only cracked and pulverized a large portion of the ice ground and cracked the blood barrier, but also caused the bridge to tremble fiercely, his body flew off in a straight line to the west. The speed at which Bai Zemin had shot out was basically the same as the speed of a cannonball fired from the main cannon of a war tank, and in an instant, he disappeared from the line of sight of all the living beings on the bridge. The zombie leader and the mermaid princess for an instant thought that the human leader was fleeing the scene. However, they soon realized that this was not the case. "Even if you run to the ends of the earth, I will find you and will kill you." Like a rabid beast, the little ape let out a terrifying roar that was at odds with its relatively diminutive body. Using its high magic power, the beast leader changed the course of the fierce air currents, and at speeds no less than Bai Zemin's speed charged westward with a whirlwind of wind and a huge blazing sun above the palms of its paws. Although the giant sun was a colossus of approximately 2,000 meters in diameter, the displacement speed of the little ape was simply too high, and therefore in a matter of seconds, all they could see from the bridge was a glowing ball that became smaller and smaller as it disappeared into the distant horizon until it reached a point where it was no longer visible. With the disappearance of the powerful magic skill of the beast leader, the swirling water slowly began to calm down as the sea finally stopped evaporating once the temperature began to plummet. With the coldness of the winds in the middle of the sea and with no structure to obstruct them, it didn't take long for the temperature to return to normal. However, apart from a dense cloud of steam that was being rapidly dispersed by the wind, in the distance could be seen the faint radiance of something bright becoming fainter and fainter as a result of the distance flattening out more and more. Shangyuan Bingshu took a deep breath, and her eyes flashed with a hint of coldness. She seized the opportunity and with a graceful sway of her waist, her body flashed, and she appeared right behind the second-order zombie commander. The zombie commander, who was stupefied by everything that was happening just like every other existence on the bridge, did not even have time to react before Shangyuan Bingshu's explosive speed, and all he knew and saw the next instant was that the world was spinning, and his body no longer had a head. Moments later, the light faded and the spark of life in his gaze dimmed until it finally disappeared. The sound of the zombie commander's body falling heavily onto part of the ice ground was like a noisy alarm going wild at 6 a.m. Everyone seemed to wake up from the dreamlike state they were in, and as if by prior agreement began to massacre each other viciously. Roar! The shark man let out a dragon-like roar, and now that the only second-order existence on top of the bridge capable of holding him back had fallen, there was no longer anyone free capable of stopping him from venting his anger and frustration on the zombies and beasts. Shangyuan Bingshu was naturally ignored by the shark man, as well as the rest of the sea creatures. Knowing that at least temporarily the humans and their race were in an alliance for survival, Shangyuan Bingshu watched as several tens of thousands of sea creatures passed by her and began to fight the now just over 900,000 army of zombies. The roars and shrieks again broke the silence that had previously reigned for a brief period of time when the beast leader activated magic ignition. Bodies were dismembered under claws and teeth, blood of different colors and varying thickness flew everywhere, broken bones fell on the ground, causing chilling sounds. For every second that passed, there were several living beings that lost all their soul power as it was absorbed by the one or ones that had killed them. The mermaid princess Xietain and the zombie leader did not remain indifferent either, as once both sides began to fight, the two leaders of their respective factions clashed again in a desperate attempt to end the life of the other as soon as possible. As the shockwaves spread far and wide, and as the sound of thunderous explosions broke under the night cloak that was slowly beginning to light up in the presence of so many magic skills, Shangyuan Bingshu stared into the distance with soft eyes for several seconds before her sharp gaze began to carefully scan the surroundings. If anything out of the ordinary happened, she would be the first to react and act accordingly. Bai Zemin had traveled over 100 kilometers but was still far from stopping. Despite the fact that below him was only water, at a movement speed exceeding 1,000 kilometers per hour by a considerable margin, and with footsteps as light as a feather, despite not running with his full self, Bai Zemin raised large waves everywhere he passed, and the wind rushing behind his body made them explode not long after he disappeared into the distance. What he was doing was very dangerous. After all, Bai Zemin had no knowledge of the waters, and sea creatures were undoubtedly the beasts he feared the most, or rather the ones he was most wary of. However, he had few options. After moving approximately 200 kilometers away from the bridge, Bai Zemin looked over his shoulder and noticed that the beast leader was following him at a speed comparable to his own, and even though it had not caught up with him yet, it was clear that if his speed dropped or if a sea enemy appeared in his path, the little ape would immediately launch the huge ball of fiery fire, similar to a bright sun rising above its head. Regardless of what reasons the little ape had for hating Bai Zemin so much, and regardless of why it was willing to sacrifice itself if it meant taking Bai Zemin's life with it, Bai Zemin only cared about his survival, and for it, he would do anything. After reaching 250 kilometers away, Bai Zemin opened his left palm and looked at the small circle of ice that Shangyuan Bingshu had handed him. Looking over his shoulder again to make sure nothing went wrong, Bai Zemin let the small magic object fall into the sea. The magic circle glowed slightly before disappearing, blending into the waters, leaving no trace of its presence, except for a slight amount of mana that did not belong there. Swoosh! The little ape passed through the area like a raging storm. Everywhere it went, a cloud of steam rose up behind its back as a result of the bright sun it carried. On the bridge, a few minutes had passed since Bai Zemin had departed, and the massacre had become more and more intense. Although the Zombie Beast Alliance had overwhelmingly higher numbers than the army of sea creatures, the ferocity of a second-order existence was not something that numbers could resolve so easily. The Sharkman, now free of all restraints, unleashed the Armageddon on the zombies and beasts. Even without activating any extravagant skills and only using his powerful physical body, each swing of his tail was enough to wipe out dozens of zombies at the same time, and when he activated a skill, the death of a few hundred was nothing strange either. Shangyuan Bingshu was attentive to her surroundings. She would occasionally slash with her sword in a direction and claim the lives of several zombies or beasts that tried to get too close of her position. Her sword had tasted the blood of several different species in a single night, and except for sea creatures, she had managed to kill at least a few tens of thousands of living beings. Suddenly, just as she withdrew her sword back into its sheath after having cut a 15-meter-tall elephant in half, Shangyuan Bingshu felt the rune representing her ice maker skill engraved deep in her soul, trembled gently. Her face changed slightly as she remembered Bai Zemin's words, and after closing her eyes, she focused in such a way that she even cut off all connection with the outside world. Cutting off her senses with the outside world while standing in the middle of such a dangerous, deadly battlefield, it was no different from suicide. However, Shangyuan Bingshu would rather endanger her life than fail and endanger the life of someone precious to her. Therefore, regardless of the possible consequences, she did what she did. 1, 2, 3. When 3 seconds had passed, her eyes opened abruptly and flashed brightly under the moonlight. Just as Bai Zemin had instructed her, after 3 seconds elapsed, she immediately activated the second activation of her ice maker skill. Stop! The little ape roared furiously. What more would it want than to throw its magic skill and turn the human it hated the most into ashes? But the beast leader was smart, and despite its hate, it did not underestimate Bai Zemin. Even though the huge sun of blazing fire it had conjured up thanks to the boost of magic power that magic ignition provided, Bai Zemin's agility was so fast that in no time he would be able to leave the area of effect of the fire skill, even more so considering that they were in the middle of the sea. Therefore, the little ape could only keep shazzing. But the problem was that at this rate its mana would be depleted before the effect of magic ignition was over. By the time that happened and the side effects came, the little ape knew that Xietain could easily end its life. Boom! Suddenly, the little ape felt an explosion behind it, and also noticed a giant object rising 10 meters behind its back. However, the beast leader ignored the object as when it looked over its shoulder, it saw that the object was a pillar of ice which, although composed of large amounts of mana, did not possess any real magic power, and therefore posed no danger whatsoever. In fact, the ice pillar was so useless that after rising 1500 meters, and despite having much more mana inside, it began to stop its growth, as the heat from the magic burning sun that the little ape had conjured was so powerful that it suppressed the growth of more ice. However, what to some was useless to others was a treasure, and what to some was a waste of time to others could be an opportunity. Now, Xieain's eyes lit up, and with a sudden movement he forcefully planted his right foot on the water he was walking on. At the same time, he moved his body sideways agilely, as if he was riding a skateboard. The speed at which Xieain was moving was so high that his body continued moving forward very fast. Xieain roared and turned his body to look directly at the little ape. As he completed the turn, he swung his spear, and the swing was so fierce that a wave of more than 20 meters in the shape of a fan rose, creating a curtain that for a split second separated him and the little ape. As the wave hit the water, the little ape's pupils twitched fiercely and contracted to the size of a needle, as a flash of dread shone in its increasingly terrified gaze. "Shit! He screwed me." Such a thought was naturally born in the heart of the beast leader, as it felt a slight surge of magic power from behind its back. The little ape had been observing Xieain carefully for a long time, therefore, the creature naturally knew him well: habits, main skills, personality, combat style, etc. How could the beast leader not know of Shadow Blink's existence? In fact, the little ape even knew that in order to use Shadow Blink, Xieain needed to have a foreign shadow to blink onto. However, the little ape had dismissed the possibility that such a skill could be used given the circumstances. After all, in the middle of the sea, there were no obstacles, and the only possible shadow that Xieain could use here was the shadow of the little ape. However, since the artificial sun was just behind the little ape, the shadow would always be cast to the front. Therefore, if Xieain used Shadow Blink, he would be moved to the shadow in front of the little ape, and the beast leader could finish him off by detonating its magic attack right there. But the appearance of the giant ice pillar had changed everything. Hoochie! The beast leader felt its back being pierced, and at the same time a sharp pain enveloped it. Its heart was pierced from side to side. The creature stiffly turned its head and with eyes full of anger and surprise, met two eyes as black as the night that had no emotion other than indifference in them. "You are indeed clever, you have my admiration for that. But at the end of the day, your power seemed to blind you for a moment," he said in a cold voice before pushing forward strongly. Boom! The beast leader's chest was crushed before it could respond, and all its internal organs were turned into slime. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 536. No one is wrong. What is wrong is this world. Xieain waved his spear and watched with cold eyes as the body of the little ape fell into the sea. Then, he looked up and noticed that the overwhelming magic power of the huge blazing fire sun that covered his entire range of vision was slowly beginning to decline after having lost the sustenance that kept it in condition. However, he noticed that while the blazing fire sun was fading, now that the air currents were no longer under the beast leader's partial control, the magic skill was beginning to fall more and more. "It's a good thing we were in the middle of the sea." Xieain breathed coldly as the gravity of the earth drew him into the water slowly after he activated gravity manipulation and reduced the gravity around him and the gravity just below the huge burning sun to the minimum possible. While this was happening, the little ape was now floating above the sea which slowly but surely began to evaporate in the surroundings, and, as a consequence, a new whirlpool of water began to form due to the abrupt absence of water in the area and the influx of more water coming from the immediate surroundings. Blood was gushing out of its body, but the little ape did not seem to feel any physical pain. Its brown eyes were looking up at the sky, more specifically, its eyes were looking at the human rising in the sky with a golden background behind him. He really looked like a true god descending over the mortal world. Tears filled the little ape's eyes as memories began to fill its mind. A little over a month and a half ago, when the apocalypse had just begun, it was during this time that the little ape met Xieain, even though Xieain did not know the little ape. It was during the time when Xieain, Shangyun Bingshu, and all the others were still in college. In fact, at that time Xieain had not even completed the evolution requirements to become a blood berserker. At that time, while humans were doing their best to survive, many beasts had managed to come to a kind of agreement in which no one attacked anyone around them. This was possible only thanks to the existence of an anomaly that rarely appears, let alone in the first weeks of the apocalypse. With the existence of an anomaly known as mana embryo, which despite having no attack or defensive skills and which despite being an extremely slow creature, the small botanical garden at Beijing University began to mutate rapidly at speeds that put any other green place to shame, and in just a week of time, that small botanical garden ended up turning into a mutated forest, where the animals that were previously in the laboratory or in the recreational area of the grounds were reunited. Among these animals, there were two apes who supported each other as much as they could and just formed an excellent team where no other creature really gave them too much trouble. These two apes simply lay around resting or sleeping, while their bodies absorbed the mana released by the mana embryo, and although the strength of both of them was inferior to that of a first-order creature, evolved normally by absorbing soul power and thus improving their stats and overall power. The mana stat of the two apes were really high, and the magic power of both of them was especially high. These two apes were mother and son. They were both pets before and the students often fed and played with them. But after the soul record arrived on Earth, one of them and the larger one went mad, losing all sense of sanity, except her affection for the other smaller ape. Meanwhile, the smaller ape seemed to be more special. The smaller ape not only managed to maintain his sanity, but his intelligence grew rapidly day by day to the point where by the time he reached First Order level 26, his natural intelligence was already comparable to that of an adult before it stagnated. However, the peaceful times did not last long. One day, when the little ape returned to the mutated forest of the university after having gone out to hunt something to eat and to make his soul stronger in a more equal way, he noticed that his mother was not there. The little ape immediately realized that something was wrong, since his mother would never leave without him, so he began to search around. However, to the little ape's horror, what he found after searching around was blood which after sniffing the little ape correctly identified as blood that belonged to his mother. The little ape followed the trails of blood and destruction that was left in the way, feeling relieved to discover that the enemy his mother was facing was clearly weaker, as it was simply fleeing from her furious attacks. However, at some point the little ape was forced to hide when in the distance he heard a roar full of anger, but at the same time pain. It was the sound of his mother. With his intelligence being so high, the feeling of fear naturally arose accordingly. Being aware of how dangerous the world was now, the little ape cowered behind a building while watching as a thick crimson chains glowed brightly, and clung to his mother's limbs in such a way that even when she shook her big body, she could not free herself. The little ape felt an urge to go help his loved one, but his rational mind won out. After all, his mother was far more powerful than he was, and if there was someone powerful enough to restrain her, then what else would he be? He would probably just get in the way. When the little ape saw the blood chains breaking, he almost jumped for joy. However, a moment later, the blood chains shimmered and became even harder than before, after repairing the cracks that covered them. Then, something that was still etched deep in the memories and soul of the little ape occurred. A male human dressed in a black coat as black as the night stepped forward while holding a large spear of the same color as the chains that clung to his mother. The human had a slight sneer on his face, and the coldness in his gaze carried a hint of natural pride that seemed to come from deep within his soul. Then, the little ape watched as the human threw his spear directly at his defenseless mother. The little ape thought his mother would be fine, since he knew she had a skill that allowed her to regenerate from almost any wound. However, what the little ape didn't know was that his mother had already been forced to use her regeneration skill. Not to mention that even if the little ape's mother still had her skill available, it was unlikely that she could do anything about it when the crimson spear pierced her head and blew it off. The little ape could still remember how fear and hatred mingled with pain and shock as he watched his mother's body fall heavily to the ground, raising a cloud of dirt in the process. He could also remember the excited looks on the humans' faces as they gathered the treasures they had obtained after hunting his mother. However, despite his hatred, the little ape was smart. He knew that if he went out now, he would be killed. That human had even killed his mother, let alone him who had barely broken into the First Order. Therefore, after looking intently at the human who had taken his mother's life in such a way that even if his bones turned to ashes, he would still be able to recognize him, the little ape left the scene. From that moment on, the little ape lived with only one goal in mind: revenge. From that moment on, the little ape left the relative safety of the university's mutant forest and began to hunt to the point of exhaustion. absorbing soul power day and night almost without rest, becoming stronger at astonishing speeds, and even hunting existences more powerful than himself using his intelligence and special tactics. However, every day, the little ape took at least 5 minutes out of his day to make sure that human was still in his detection range. Time passed, and soon, the humans left the university. The mutant forest that had been his home for so long had been destroyed. The culprit had been the same human who had taken the life of his mother. The hatred and anger in the little ape's heart grew day by day, driving him to the brink of madness with increasing intensity. But the little ape endured. He knew it was not yet time. His strength was far from enough. He needed more. The days passed and turned into weeks, and the weeks eventually turned into months. However, no matter how much time passed, the little ape would never forget his goal. The pain that still lingered in his heart would not allow it. Such pain could only, maybe, be suppressed by getting revenge. The little ape continued to hunt as much as he could, barely getting any sleep for himself, and only eating what he needed when necessary. Moreover, with the constant increase of power, the little ape had also managed to get his own subordinates, who kept him abreast of the situation in the human camp, led by that male human he hated so much. The little ape's life was like hell for an intelligent being like him. Hunt, 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 suppress, hunt, hunt, hunt and more hunt. However, the little ape not only did not stop, but worked harder after seeing how that human ended the life of a second-order existence, because he could not rest or he would be left behind, and his revenge could never be carried out. Under his abysmal effort and thanks to a fortuitous encounter after fighting a battle in which he was almost killed together with his enemy, the little ape managed to evolve in such a way that the confidence he needed finally came to him. Now I can do it. That was what the little ape thought. Then, the little ape, who had now become the leader of practically all the strongest beasts in Yanking District, set up a plan together with the zombie leader with whom he had come to an agreement to share the treasure when the two of them were fighting to the death, as neither of them wanted to suffer too serious wounds. After all, being badly wounded in this world was no different from being dead. Everything was perfect. The little ape was 100% sure that this time he would be able to get his long-awaited and long-desired revenge. But reality was cruel, and life often dealt us such hard blows that it was not easy to get back on our feet. Arg. Frustrated, angry, grieved, hurt, feeling prejudiced, the little ape tried unsuccessfully to release some of all those compressed emotions in a scream, which was soon drowned out by his coughs and blood flowing from his mouth. The little ape watched as the human he hated so much stood above the sea, using a thin plate of blood, and said without energy, "By Xietain, give it back to me." Give it back? By Xietain looked at the beast leader blankly and frowned. "My mother, my life, give it back to me. You took everything from me." The little ape's eyes filled with tears as he screamed again, aggravating his already mortal wounds even more. But the little ape didn't care. He knew this was the end of the road for him anyway. All he was doing now was just letting out frustrations before his time comes. By Xietan's mouth opened slightly before he closed it again. The wind howled loudly, and his hair blew wildly as 600 meters above him. The fiery sun filled with magic power came closer and closer. By Xietain had killed too much in his path. Every step he took forced him to do so. Therefore, it was no surprise that in the process of growing up and becoming stronger, he might have destroyed several families, not only human, but of other races as well. After all, it was survival of the fittest. The world was cruel, and if he wanted to continue to advance, then he had to mold himself to it. Otherwise, if he was not cruel to his enemies, he would be being cruel to himself. The little ape could not see what kind of expression By Xietain had on his face, as the fringe of his hair partially covered his eyes. All the little ape heard was his voice. "I'm sorry, I'm just trying to survive, just like you. Just like everyone here." Then, By Xietain looked up to look the little ape in the eyes and said in a pure voice, "You also know what the world is like now. I have no choice but to do it." Of course, the little ape understood and knew deep in his heart that what By Xietain was saying and what he was doing was not really bad. The circumstances of the world were. Like the little ape and his mother in the past, By Xietain also had no options from which to choose. It was hunt or be hunted. The little ape laughed curtly as he closed his eyes. Tears streamed down his furry face as his short life sped by at lightning speed similar to a movie. It all happened in the blink of an eye, and just as the little ape's last memory aligned with the current situation, all pain disappeared. No more emotional pain tearing at his soul and no more physical pain. Only silence and peace. Finally, peace. You have received the soul power of Third Order, Super Intelligent Vengeful Ape Beast Letter Level 101. Bai Zemin retracted his spear after destroying the little ape's brain, and as he watched the corpse of his former enemy slowly being washed away by the waters, he couldn't help but sigh. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 537. Elf Queen's frozen pride. And close to the end, hundreds of thoughts flashed at lightning speed and struck Bai Zemin at almost the same time, all at once. However, there were some of them that previously had not been so important, but now Bai Zemin was forced to revisit his own actions for a moment. In the past, just as Lilith had said at the beginning of the apocalypse, humans kill pigs and sheep in order to feed themselves, and even now, after the apocalypse, evolved humans would delve into the mutated forests to hunt beasts in order to eat their meat. Then, for the first time, Bai Zemin pondered a thought which in the past would never have occurred to him. This was a thought that he simply could not think of since his birth limited him just like any other human. After all, Bai Zemin was also human, regardless of how strong he was. In the past, this kind of thinking could be seen as foolish or naive, even idealistic. However, with the world evolving non-stop day after day, Bai Zemin felt that for his own growth and for the sake of his own future, he had to consider it. Before, humans killed sheep for food. Now, humans kill mutated beasts for food. However, unlike most cases in the past, if a human today wanted to eat the meat of if a human killed a tiger for food and strengthening, then that was fine. However, if a human died at the paws of a mutated tiger, that human's family would suffer endless pain for the rest of their lives. Then, what about that tiger's family? Didn't animals have families of their own? In the past, these were two questions that were insignificant to most, but needed to be considered now that animals had mutated and were beginning to awaken intelligence and feelings, not beneath those of a human. Now, Bai Zemin felt it was right to assume that cases like that of the little ape might happen more often. This particular case had surprised him greatly, as it was the first time such a thing had happened to him. But who was to say that such a thing would not happen again? Tomorrow, Bai Zemin or any of his subordinates could kill a mutated beast without knowing that the slain beast had a partner or children, without knowing that they would be hurting the feelings of others, and without knowing that they were destroying a family, without knowing that they might have attracted a being that would stop at nothing for revenge. What would I do if someone murdered a member of my family? Bai Zemin took a brief moment to ask himself such a question, but the mere thought of it caused his blood to run cold and the anger in his heart to surge. Of course, he would seek out the culprit or culprits, even if he had to go to hell itself. So, why wouldn't other sentient beings do the same as him? It was not only the animals that had mutated into beasts, but any other race that was born from now on in the earth applied for this. But in the end, Bai Zemin found the answer faster than he expected. It was a very simple answer. It was not as difficult as it all seemed. I will simply do what I have to do to survive, and for those important to me to survive, creating enemies in this world is a given. It is simply impossible not to create enmities when there are no firm rules, not to mention that in order to grow, I have no choice but to kill. The cold winds of the freezing night blew hard, carrying his voice for miles. His words echoed and resonated for a long time. It was just that the one who had spoken them was no longer in sight, and even the corpse of the creature that had given him an important lesson, despite having known it for a couple of minutes, also disappeared, along with the owner of the male voice. Seconds later, a giant sun brimming with magic power over 1,000 meters in diameter fell into the sea. The water devoured the fire, and when the cloud of steam reached colossal heights, an explosion that would become a catastrophe for mankind happened at a depth of more than 2,000 meters. And so, one of the battles that could very well have become the trigger that destroyed cities and annihilated forests ended with only one death, and a valuable lesson for the victor. Shangyuan Bingshu watched from a distance as the battle between the mermaid princess and the zombie leader unfolded, but there came a time when she even felt bored. Although it was universally surprising that the mermaid princess could face the zombie leader despite being one stage below, in the eyes of existences like Shangyuan Bingshu herself, it was nothing to be praised. After all, both she and Bai Zemin and many others from the Transcendent faction were able to skip levels, and a few were even able to stand up to an existence one stage above. While it was amazing to see the mermaid princess's seemingly endless water summonings, as well as her impressive magical skills to boost the power of such summonings, and while it was truly amazing to see how the zombie leader destroyed purely with physical attacks each of the water-created beasts, Shangyuan Bingshu could not help but feel that the battle was going on for too long. Of course, most of her anxiety stemmed from the fact that she did not know how Bai Zemin had been doing. So far, she heard no explosions from the distance, and even though it had been several minutes since Bai Zemin had left with the beast leader in pursuit, there was still no sign of him in sight. As the Mermaid Princess and the zombie leader fought, the war between the Zombie Beast Alliance and the sea creatures was in full swing and getting fiercer and fiercer. There were only about 20,000 sea beasts left, but the zombie army had been reduced from 900,000 to less than 400,000. This showed that the sea beasts, despite being infinitely fewer in numbers, made up for it with ferocity and tenacity. The zombies were not at all scary once the fear of infection was removed. Furthermore, this war had served for Shangyun Bingshu and Bai Zemin to discover that the human body was the only one that seemed to experience problems when scratched or bitten by zombies, as the sea creatures were clearly immune. This opened a door with infinite possibilities that needed to be studied more deeply little by little. Under the ferocious attacks of the Shark Man, the zombie army began to fall, and the beast's presence slowly moved into the path of annihilation. However, just then a change occurred. The beasts that were focused on killing sea creatures suddenly stopped dead in their tracks, and their eyes turned blood red. They all let out thunderous roars that shook the bridge and the atmosphere surrounding the area before they began to slaughter the first thing closest to them. Right, left, north, or south, it didn't matter where, it didn't even matter the race, as the beasts slaughtered everything in sight. Phew! The lead zombie who had just landed back on the bridge after failing miserably to beat the Mermaid Princess shouted in frustration and fury as he watched the beasts begin to attack each other and even his army of zombies. That stupid ape really died? The lead zombie's disbelieving and furious shout caused Shangyun Bingshu's eyes to light up as if thousands of star-filled galaxies were dancing inside them. That shameless little bastard really did it again. Shangyun Bingshu's lips pursed into a slightly happy but mostly proud smile. The battle that Bai Zemin had just won was the first real battle that, from a certain point of view, represented two great powers of the human race and the beast race, a battle in which two great leaders clashed and in which the human leader won. However, just as Shangyun Bingshu was happy and proud of Bai Zemin's achievement, her beautiful face turned white as a sheet when a giant beast towered over her out of nowhere. The beast was similar to a huge crocodile, and when her blue eyes met those two big bright yellow reptile eyes, Shangyun Bingshu felt her blood run cold. The alligator, which was once the beast leader's mount as well as a compliment to his lack of physical ability, jumped up from the bottom of the sea the first moment a golden opportunity appeared. The beast had been waiting for the moment when one of the main enemies of the opposing side would slip up after its presence had been missing for so long, and that opportunity had come now. This alligator was a second-order level 92 beast that was especially intelligent, despite not having the ability to speak. While the alligator knew that its master had died, the beast had decided to take the life of the human woman who was accompanying the culprit of its master's death as punishment, before disappearing into the waters and returning to land later. However, even though Shangyun Bingshu had been caught off guard since she was right at one end of the bridge, and even though her guard was at its lowest point after getting good news, she had already made preparations long ago after Bai Zemin warned her that something might happen because he somehow felt uncomfortable. Boom! An explosion of frozen air burst out in front of Shangyun Bingshu. Frost and ice fragments flew everywhere, forming a dense frozen cloud over 400 meters high and over 900 meters in diameter. The alligator lashed out with its tail without holding back at all, as it could still faintly see the shadow of the human female in the middle of the frost cloud. However, the beast was shocked when the strength behind its swing was reduced by 40% as soon as it came in contact with the frozen mist, and for every meter forward the power was reduced more and more. HMPH. Shangyun Bingshu snorted, and a flash of anger shone in her blue eyes. The sapphire on her crown elf queen's frozen pride suddenly let out a faint warm radiance, and under the terrified eyes of the alligator, its tail began to freeze. However, this was no ordinary ice. Looking beyond the fog, the alligator was alarmed when it faintly noticed that behind the human woman was another woman, who, although it was impossible to see her appearance due to the frost fog, was definitely a beauty from the human standard, judging by her silhouette. Elf Queen's frozen pride, Shangyun Bingshu sang in a cold voice. Swoosh! The silhouette of the second woman who had just appeared pointed her index finger forward, and all the frost fog suddenly compressed before flying all the way towards the alligator. Swoosh! A large part of the bridge was completely sealed under the ice, and over 2,000 kilometers of the sea in front of Shangyun Bingshu turned into an ice arena. Sealed in an ice statue that joined perfectly with the bridge, the alligator looked outward with its eyes wide open. It was just that while the alligator's eyes were open, in reality, the beast could no longer see. You have received the soul power of second-order colossal destructive alligator level 92. Shangyuan Bingshu unconsciously let out a sigh of relief in her heart as the light in the sapphire of her elf queen's frozen pride dimmed. Her treasure lost all luster and even dulled, having lost all magic power. It needed time to recharge in order to be usable again. If not for the fact that she had taken Bai Zemin's words too seriously and had set a trap beforehand using the second activation of her Ice Maker skill, Shangyuan Bingshu might have encountered severe trouble and her life might have fallen into mortal danger. Fortunately, Shangyuan Bingshu had learned that Bai Zemin seemed to be not only a tenacious and powerful man, but also seemed to have a sixth sense, as his intuition rarely failed. Seeing that things were getting completely out of his control, the zombie leader let out a vicious roar and a huge sound wave spread across the entire bridge. The zombies that were fighting froze for a moment when the sound wave hit them, and then began to turn around to try to flee in a southerly direction, as it was the closest area to the mainland, despite being more than 45 kilometers away. However, how could the sea creatures let the zombies run away? Seizing the opportunity, the sea creatures not only continued slaughtering the beasts that had lost their leader, but also slaughtered even more ferociously the zombies, which due to their agility now just beginning to be comparable to that of a normal human, could not run too far before being overtaken again. Haha, zombie leader, looks like the human leader managed to end the beast leader's life. Xietain burst out laughing. Her laughter was extremely beautiful to listen to, similar to a melody sung by the gods, and the joy in her words was so great that it encouraged her subordinates to kill their enemies with even more ferocity than before. The human leader is probably on his way here. How about you stay to greet him? Xietain sneered as she understood the zombie leader's intention, and with a swing of her staff, created 3 water dragons at the same time. Roar, roar, roar. The 3 water dragons with ice armor surrounding their bodies roared low before rushing forward with the same common goal. Fucking bitch, the zombie leader was enraged when his escape routes were obstructed, and without any other choice, he began to fight against the extremely sturdy water dragons. The zombie leader knew that if he did not flee soon, by the time Bai Zemin reached the bridge, his life would be over under the Human Sea Alliance. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 538. End of the first major war involving 4 races. Although the Sea Princess Xietain tried with all her might to prevent the zombie leader from escaping, it was not an easy if not an impossible task for her to accomplish on her own. Xietain was already having some difficulty in facing the zombie leader as she kept her distance and launched magic attacks from the top of her wave, keeping the zombie leader at bay to prevent it from getting too close to her, as that would probably be her downfall. Therefore, wanting to stop an existence that was already more powerful than her to begin with had become too much of a challenge for her. With Xietain sending out water summoning after water summoning and making use of all her aquatic control over the surrounding area, as well as casting every single magic skill at her disposal, the zombie leader was effectively slowed down. However, the fact that the zombie leader was slightly contained did not mean that Xietain could hold him back forever. Slowly but surely, the zombie leader broke through the defenses imposed by the mermaid princess until he finally managed to break through the siege between the 10 or so water dragons that coiled around the bridge, creating an apocalyptic image worthy of an Oscar-nominated movie. Damn it! Xietain couldn't help but curse as her last water dragon was smashed into the sea by the fists of the zombie leader. Are you going to run away, zombie leader? Will you abandon your race to their fate? All she could do was try to use offensive words to stop the retreating footsteps of the third-order existence. However, the mermaid princess's efforts were fruitless, as far from stopping the zombie leader showed how little he cared for his race when he mercilessly slaughtered all the zombies that came his way, effectively creating a bloody trail. Although the mermaid princess could hold off the zombie leader longer, to accomplish such a thing, she would first have to approach the bridge and activate her magic skills from a close range in order to force the zombie leader to stop unless he wanted to be hit by a deluge of magic attacks. It was just that Xietain had no intention of doing such a thing. After all, one punch from the zombie leader would probably be more than enough to send her back to the bottom of the sea, with wounds from which Xietain would not be able to free herself in a day or two. Just as the zombie leader was escaping while swearing to one day take revenge just like every second-rate villain after being defeated by one of the main characters of countless web novels, a silhouette suddenly appeared in his line of sight. A vicious smile appeared at the corner of the zombie leader's deformed mouth as he recognized the human woman who seemed to be especially close to that odious male human. Before I leave, I'd better drop off a farewell gift, or else the humans will think that we, zombies, are an unprincipled race. That was what the zombie leader thought as his body seemed to flash and disappear from his position, only to appear a moment later in front of the beautiful silver-haired human woman. The blue eyes of the woman did not even seem to reflect the silhouette of the zombie leader as the creature struck viciously using his right tentacle. The smile at the corner of the zombie leader's mouth became even more ferocious when his tentacle finally hit something. Bang! However, the fierce expression on the face of the zombie leader suddenly changed when, after receiving a powerful blow from him, the body of the beautiful silver-haired woman exploded and turned into countless small flashes of blue electricity before disappearing without a trace. The zombie leader quickly realized that he had been tricked, and even though he didn't believe in any way that this human woman could hurt him, he didn't dare to try to take the risk. Therefore, he hurriedly stepped aside. This time, the zombie leader would really leave with no intention of playing any more games. However, 20 meters ahead, the zombie leader's surprised gaze met with two beautiful blue eyes that now glowed with a strange radiance that was clearly unnatural. Such a beautiful gaze. Who wouldn't be willing to die to protect those lovely eyes? Not to mention that face that, despite being masked by a fog of frozen emotions, actually seemed to hide as much fire and energy as that of a burning volcano. Nasty thoughts of all kinds clouded the senses of the zombie leader, but before his mind was further affected, the creature realized that he had fallen under the effect of some kind of mind control skill. Once the zombie leader realized this fact, and not even a second after, he fell under the spell of Shangyuan Bingshu's gaze. Even though several seconds seemed to have passed inside his mind, the creature managed to shake off her charming eyes skill. However, when the zombie leader came back to himself, the first thing he saw was that same woman now less than 10 meters ahead, slashing with her sword towards him. Blizzard, Shangyuan Bingshu said in a clear voice tinged with a tinge of apprehension. From such a close distance, the zombie leader could easily extend one of his tentacles, and considering the difference in power between the two sides, Shangyuan Bingshu knew perfectly well that she would not be able to evade being hit. She would be lucky if her body did not receive serious wounds, but she would definitely become a zombie. It was just that she had no choice. If she didn't take risks, the zombie leader would escape. Just like Bai Zemin always said, to win one needed to take risks. If one wasn't willing to risk one's life in a big way, then one couldn't expect to become big. Swoosh! A dense cloud of frost surrounded by thin crystalline ice particles erupted from the magic circles around Shangyuan Bingshu's sword. Accompanying the horizontal slash of her sword, the dense frost fog exploded powerfully forward, and in less than a split of a second, closed the 10 meters separating the zombie leader from her. While the agility and reaction speed of the zombie leader were praiseworthy, it was naturally an impossible fact for him to move even faster than an attack that not only caught him off guard, but also covered such a large area and advanced towards him from such a close distance. Using charming eyes to contain the zombie leader as much as possible, Shangyuan Bingshu took full advantage of that split second when the creature had been stopped and activated Blizzard. The dense frost fog extended over 900 meters along the bridge, and in addition to covering its entire width, also partially froze part of the sea 200 meters below, as proof of how low the temperatures were. The dense frost fog was soon swept away by the strong winds, exposing the body of the zombie leader. The zombie leader had naturally not died. It was impossible for Shangyuan Bingshu to claim the zombie leader's life with her current strength, let alone with a mass control skill whose power was dispersed. However, despite not being dead, the zombie leader's body was covered by a faint layer of ice that not only caused the blood in his body to circulate slower, but also caused his limbs to become a little stiff. With the zombie leader's movement speed dropping by more than 30% during the first seconds, Shangyuan Bingshu quickly backed off as blue lightning crackled around her body and illuminated the surrounding area. Moreover, her bold move and bravery was not wasted at all. Roar! A giant beast over 20 meters tall and at least 500 meters long covered the moonlight with an appearance similar to a true oriental dragon, but at the same time different, as a series of tentacles covered part of its body, appeared in the seas. The waters shook as the beast let out a thunderous roar that sent zombies, beasts, and sea creatures alike flying off the bridge. The beast was so large that even Shangyuan Bingshu felt a little intimidated under its grotesque appearance. However, it was clear that the beast was at least a temporary ally, as upon closer inspection, she noticed that the dragon-like creature was made of pure water. Leviathan? Xietain voice broke through the middle of the night, and with her face so pale beyond normal, she pointed forward as she commanded in a cold voice, "Restrain him." Roar! The water leviathan roared again and with its large size, managed to stop the zombie leader's charge. This was the most powerful active skill of Xietain, and she had to pay a great price to form it. However, with the power of a peak second-order existence, Leviathan would definitely be able to buy some time. Boom! 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 The zombie leader's fists were like nuclear bombs, each blow destroyed part of Leviathan's body, and he was slowly able to continue his advance in a southerly direction. However, the monster called by the Mermaid Princess proved that while it could not compare to the zombie leader in most respects, its tenacity and vitality were especially high as it consumed huge amounts of water and slowly regenerated its lost parts. After destroying the Leviathan's tentacles, the zombie leader was ready to break the lockdown. However, the effective blizzard was still present, and this ended up taking its toll on him when he least expected it. Boom! The bridge suddenly shook, and a large rock almost 100 meters wide under Xietain Bingshu's shocked eyes flew into the sky. Her beautiful eyes reflected as the rock rose over 2,000 meters in an instant, and her heart tightened as she felt the bridge below her crumbling as if it was about to fall. If the bridge collapsed now, then none of this would make any sense. All of Xietan's plans would go down the drain, and all the work he had put in over the past few days would go to waste. Freeze! Xietain Bingshu shouted in a high-pitched voice. The dread in her voice was more than clear. The mana burst outwards, and without bothering to delicately control her skill, she simply took advantage of the huge wave of water that had risen to freeze the bottom section in such a way that the bridge was temporarily safe. The Mermaid Princess did not seem to care at all about Xietain Bingshu's troubles. Her deep blue eyes looked up into the night sky, and in her pupils reflected the large rock that had been sent flying by her Leviathan's surprise attack. The Sea Princess only cared about containing the zombie leader, but little did she expect that under the partial loss of a significant part of his mobility, after being affected by that beautiful human woman's frost skill, she would be presented with such a golden opportunity. With the zombie leader completely losing his agility in the sky, the odds that Xietain could suddenly kill him had shot skyward. Therefore, as the Sea Princess sent a command to Leviathan and watched the silhouette flying uncontrollably into the sky with shining eyes, her body shuddered at the possibility of taking the life of a third-order existence. In the sky, the zombie leader had been sent flying, and with his feet far from the ground, it was difficult for him to control the direction he was moving. Bang! 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 The sound of bangs coming from the distance became clearer and clearer in the zombie leader's head, even though the strong winds at an altitude of over 1,000 meters made it difficult to hear anything distinctly. Then, his eyes twitched as a silhouette appeared 1,000 meters below his body like a ghost, followed by two huge waves, opening up in a straight line for over 2,000 meters. The silhouette that had appeared just below the zombie leader was precisely Xietain. His body flashed, and when he saw the situation on the bridge his heart went cold. Taking advantage of the sliding momentum caused by his high movement speed, Xietain planted his feet in the water, and while moving without a surfboard, he stomped hard and shot into the sky like a rocket. Boom! An explosion followed by a huge wave of water surged up, covering the spot where Xietain had been a moment ago. It only took a split second for him to reach the zombie leader's height. The zombie leader roared in anger, and with fear mixed amidst all his rage, he slammed his hardened tentacle downward. Xietain extended both hands towards his waist, as if he was unsheathing a sword, and the purple storage ring on his finger let out a faint glow. In the next instant, a giant sword that was almost as tall as Xietain himself appeared between the grasp of his two hands. As if time had slowed down, the zombie leader's red pupils reflected the appearance of the greatsword, and his eyes trembled fiercely as he realized that this greatsword was the weapon that had appeared in the human's hands momentarily, when the beast leader had managed to imprison him with his wind magic skill. Remembering what happened when the human in front of him struck with that weapon, the zombie leader roared downward as he used every ounce of strength he had in his body to power up his attack. The surrounding air exploded noisily, and the wind seemed to be cut into two halves as the zombie leader's tentacle passed by. Xietain also let out his own war cry, and with his eyes bloodshot after not having rested for more than 2 days, and after having taken the lives of so many living beings, he fiercely swung his greatsword from below upwards. This was the final confrontation that closed the curtain on the First Great War fought by 4 different races under 2 alliances. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 539 Atlantis. The legendary Lost City. For a moment, it seemed as if time had stopped. At the contact of the greatsword and the most powerful weapon in Xietan's possession with the rampaging tentacle, and empowered by every active skill that increased the physical attack power of the zombie leader, the world fell silent. Eyes as black as the night met eyes as red as the blood. Both gazes were bloodthirsty, and the only emotion visible in the other's eyes was murderous intent born from the depths of the soul. The wind stopped blowing, gravity stopped working, the sounds coming from the bridge and its surroundings no longer could be heard, and with the moon as a witness high in the sky, the world surrounding the area seemed to enter under a strange pause effect. However, that strange pause did not last more than a second, because as Xietain and the zombie leader stared into each other's eyes, the awaiting hell that was ready to be unleashed finally broke all restraints that held it back. Boom! Shangyuan Bingshu had never seen or heard the explosion of a nuclear bomb in her entire life. Furthermore, since she had not been present at the battle to the death between Xietain and Lanera, or the short confrontation between Xietain and Ember Thanath when they invaded Oblong World, she also did not know how powerful a swing of Xietan's sword at full power could be. However, this had been by far the most terrifying sound of explosion she had ever experienced in her life. The clash between Xietan's greatsword and the zombie leader's tentacles not only caused a thunderous explosion, but the expansive shockwave spread far enough that even someone like the Sea Princess could not see the limit of its growth. Waves of colossal size rose more than 5,000 meters high, and the sea below the bridge shook with such force that the land more than 50 kilometers away in a northerly direction opened up as cracks more than 200 meters in diameter covered the ground. The bridge rumbled and one of the columns collapsed, causing many more zombies to fall into the sea. Had it not been for Shangyuan Bingshu's quick action, what would have collapsed would have been not just a secondary pillar, but the entire bridge. In the sky, as if gravity could no longer affect them, Xietain and the zombie leader seemed to freeze as a huge bubble of vacuum in which even the air had been expelled enveloped them. The red flashes of lightning from the greatsword sizzled furiously inside the vacuum bubble as more and more black lightning with golden edges threatened to sneak into the world from the thin spatial rift that had opened up above their heads. The face of the zombie leader distorted into a hideous grimace filled with hatred, and his eyes widened to the maximum extent possible as he let out a choked roar. However, in the next instant, his expression of hatred froze as his tentacled body blasted into a mist of purple-blackish blood that partially blocked the inner view of the vacuum bubble from the outside world. Boom! Another terrifying explosion rumbled as the vacuum bubble was shattered once Xietan's greatsword lost whatever was obstructing its path. The large blade of the giant sword quickly widened before the frightened but mostly disbelieving pupils of the zombie leader, and before his body was sent flying by the ferocious shockwave brought by the weapon, his head was firmly struck. Boom! Like a watermelon falling from a 10th floor, the head of the zombie leader not only exploded but was practically pulverized. Black-tinged blood along with brain matter and small pieces of shattered skull flew everywhere and rained down on the sea waters once the world's gravity pulled them in. You have received the soul power of Apocalyptic Power Zombie Shin level 101. While the records of the Apocalyptic Power Zombie were stored deep within the soul of Xietain, waiting to be absorbed when he completed his mission to advance to the Second Order, his arms went horribly numb after facing the unrestrained attack of the now-dead zombie leader. The Apocalyptic Power Zombie was truly worthy of the name. Even someone as powerful as Xietain felt his chest tightening along with the blood inside his body stirring disorderly. He barely managed to restrain the urge to spit out blood, thanks to his skilled blood manipulation. While it was true that the Apocalyptic Power Zombie had the advantage in the previous clash, as he was in a more elevated position when attacking, while Xietain had to strike from a disadvantageous position at the same time lifting horrendous weight from his weapon. Considering all the passive buff Xietain received from his various skills was proof of how terrifying the zombie leader had been while he was alive. Xietain? A loud call filled with urgency forced Xietain back to reality, despite the terrifying pain that overwhelmed his senses, not only attacking him from the physical side, but also from the spiritual side. With the vacuum bubble bursting and disappearing, the Earth's gravity pulled Xietain back onto the bridge. However, in his free fall, Xietain noticed a flash of purple light, thanks to the shine of the bright moon. Soul Stone? Xietan's eyes lit up with excitement at the realization that the Apocalyptic Power Zombie had formed a third-order soul stone in his head. However, in the midst of the pain and excitement, Xietain spotted a shadow swiftly charging towards the soul stone. A giant monster stretched across the sky and an extremely long tentacle charged like lightning towards the soul stone. The expression of Xietain changed dreadfully as he realized that it would be difficult for him to reach the soul stone before the giant monster. In a flash of inspiration and with his heart burning with anxiety, he opened his mouth wide and his throat moved strangely. Xietain did not even realize that he had unconsciously activated one of his newly learned skills. Roar! The sound wave traveled swiftly, striking the Leviathan of the Sea Princess and hitting its spirit on the spot. The sky-blue eyes of the creature clouded over, and as if it had suddenly fainted in mid-flight, its body began to plummet towards the sea. Boom! The massive body of the Leviathan hit the sea, and a great wave of more than 500 meters rose into the sky at the same time that the creature momentarily disappeared from sight under the cover of the waters that swayed uncontrollably over its body. Under the anxious eyes of the Sea Princess, Xietain extended his hand forward, and taking advantage of the drops of blood from the corpse of the apocalyptic power zombie that still fell next to the corpse itself, he activated blood manipulation. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. The small purple-blackish drops quickly coalesced into a large blood string, and under Xietan's control the string coiled around the third-order soul stone. With a strong pulling and a few meters before hitting the bridge, Xietain forcefully pulled the blood string and caught the soul stone, before quickly activating gravity manipulation in reverse to reduce his falling speed. When Xietan's feet touched the bridge again, Shangyun Bingshu hurriedly charged forward and approached him. "Are you okay?" was the first thing she asked. "I'm fine," Xietain replied dryly. He waved his hand casually and put into his storage ring the corpse of the apocalyptic power zombie that landed next to him. Then, he looked at Shangyun Bingshu and said this time more softly, "Thank you for everything, Bingshu. If not for you, I'm afraid tonight my plans would have failed terribly." While it was true that Shangyun Bingshu had not obeyed his command to stay at the base, the distance between the Baequan camp and the bridge center was just over 300 kilometers. With her movement speed, she could close that distance in a matter of minutes. In fact, so far it had been perhaps 40 to 50 minutes since Shangyun Bingshu had arrived. Moreover, even though Xietain could have won this battle with or without Shangyun Bingshu, his main objective, which was to prevent the bridge from falling, definitely could not have been completed. It was thanks to Shangyun Bingshu that the concrete bridge withstood so many physical, magic, and shockwave attacks capable of bringing down buildings. However, who knew that instead of feeling praised by Xietan's words, Shangyun Bingshu would shake her head. She looked into his eyes with a pale face and said softly, "Don't thank me yet." Xietain looked at her blankly. However, Shangyun Bingshu's next words chilled his blood. "I am running out of mana. Although right now the ice I created after freezing the waves is holding this bridge, that ice only has a little over 10 points of mana in it, and I've been holding it up until now barely as the wind here is blowing too hard and the sea waters are too wild." Shangyun Bingshu made a pause and whispered in a voice that only both of them could hear, "If we are lucky, only part of it will fall, and we can make up for that with our skills, but if not, I'm afraid the bridge might break in half and sink into the sea forever." The expression on the face of Xietain sank when he heard this, and unconsciously his gaze went to the place where practically 70% of the width of the bridge that had frozen under Shangyun Bingshu's prompt reaction was missing. If when the ice disappeared what fell was the remaining 30% of that part, then Xietain didn't have to worry, since when it came time to let those following him cross, he simply had to activate blood manipulation to prepare a short platform for everyone to go through. Even Shangyun Bingshu could do this. However, if the entire bridge collapsed after losing the remaining 30% of that part, then Xietain really wouldn't know what to do. After all, even though he was powerful, his blood manipulation skill was not powerful enough to stretch 100 kilometers across and build a new temporary bridge. Xietain would either run out of mana before achieving such a thing, or lose contact with the blood due to his low magic stat. Just at that moment, the voice of the Sea Princess reached Xietain. "Human leader, you really succeeded in killing the beast leader." Xietain turned his body to look in the direction of the Sea Princess, and his eyes flashed with a hint of coldness that soon disappeared without a trace. Xianmeyer looked at the human on the bridge, and for obvious reasons, controlled the sea waters to stay away. Furthermore, she forced the Leviathan to stand between her and the bridge as a primary protective measure. After all, although she and Xietain were in an alliance, it was an alliance born out of common interests. Now that the enemies had been practically annihilated, it was hard to know what would happen next. Not just the beast leader. You even managed to kill the zombie leader with a single blow. I must admit, you surprised me. This is the first time in my life that I don't feel disgusted for a human," she said. Her clear voice was extremely pleasing to the ears in itself, and hearing her speak words of praise was like casting a love spell on a normal man. However, Xietain was not a normal man. Even without the skill stone heart, it was unlikely that something as simple as the voice of the mermaid princess could affect his reasoning. "You praise me, princess of the sea," Xietain replied with a slight polite smile on his face. Had it not been for the fact that the zombie leader was in full flight, it would have been impossible for me to use my strongest weapon like that, and thus it would not have been possible to end his life so easily. The mermaid princess looked at the bridge before looking back at Xietain and saying in a strange voice, "I've noticed it before, but it seems that you and that human woman next to you have interest in this bridge." With the intelligence of Xietain, it was naturally impossible to hide Xietain and Shangyuan Bingshu's desperate attempts to protect the bridge. Therefore, Xietain did not try to hide it when he realized that the obvious had been exposed. Indeed, this bridge is important to me. I needed to move my troops to the other side, or otherwise it will take me months to go around 2 whole districts to get to the place I need to reach, he said honestly but without giving too much detail about it. The eyes of Xietain flashed strangely, and after a moment of silence, she said with a beautiful smile, "Since that's the case, how about I help you hold this bridge steady while you and your troops walk over?" A flash of coldness as quick as lightning flashed in the gaze of Xietain. With no change of expression, he said with a smile, "Oh, since it is like this, then I'll have to thank the Sea Princess beforehand." Xietain already found it strange that the Sea Princess did not say anything about the third-order soul stone that he obtained after turning the zombie leader's head into tomato pulp. However, now that he heard her kind proposal, things became more than clear. Xietain chuckled at Xietan's clear attempt to play dumb. She waved her staff and moved a little closer to the bridge, but not too close, just enough so that everyone could see each other more clearly. "Let me introduce myself. My name is Xietain, 7th Princess of the Eastern Sea and 10th contender for the throne of Lost City. Daughter of King Xianxiu, current temporary ruler of the place you humans know as Atlantis." And so, Xietain and Shangyuan Bingshu learned that apparently, this legendary place known among humans was actually not just a legend. Blood Warlock, Succubus Partner and the Apocalypse. Chapter 540 Sea Race and Princess Difficulties. Atlantis? The expressions on the faces of Shangyuan Bingshu and Xietain froze when they heard that word, no, more than a word, a name. There were many legends and all kinds of theories, as well as countless myths running through each letter of the name Atlantis. Some said that Atlantis had once been an island with great military might, others said that in reality Atlantis, or also known as Lost City, had once been the city where the gods dwelled because it was rich with divine treasures and high technology. No one knew what the reality of Atlantis was. However, it was true that over the years the mystery behind this name had withstood the erosion of time, and generation after generation, it made itself known. Despite being only a myth, despite being supposedly just a city or island that had sunk into the bottom of the ocean, Atlantis was undoubtedly a place that many had tried to find throughout the ages, but at the end of their lives, all these adventurers left empty-handed, carrying nothing but disappointment in their hearts. Little did 2 young adults who had not even finished their studies like Xietain and Shangyuan Bingshu expect to hear from the mouth of a mermaid princess that the legendary Atlantis was actually not just a false myth, but a reality that existed into the seas. Still feeling stupefied, Xietain nodded towards the mermaid princess and said in a flat voice, "It is a pleasure to meet you, 7th Princess. My name is Xietain. A medical student and formerly an employee of a mechanic shop. My father used to work as a truck driver and my mother as an English teacher in primary level education. My birthplace is China, 20 years old, blood type A positive." Shangyuan Bingshu and Xietain looked at Xietain with wide eyes without saying a word. The first one was so dumbfounded that she had to use every bit of willpower she had not to laugh out loud, not out of mockery, but because of how Xietain was able to say such words with a serious face. Meanwhile, the second one had no idea what the human on the bridge was even saying. "I understand about a medical student, but what is a mechanic shop?" Xietain tilted her head, extremely confused. She looked at Xietain and asked, "Also, although I know that English is a language you humans know, I don't know what a truck is. About the blood type, my blood is pure royal blood, but I don't know more than that." This time it was Xietan's turn to be a bit speechless. Could it be that this mermaid princess is secretly an airhead? Such a thought was naturally born in Xietan's heart before he dismissed it. Sea creatures and humans lived different lives since forever, and were only now beginning to gradually connect under the influence of constant evolution. Therefore, regardless of how intelligent the sea princess might be, it was only natural that she did not know basic and unimportant things about mankind. In fact, Xietain and Shangyuan Bingshu could see how the deep blue pearl that was embedded in the forehead of the mermaid princess Xietain would light up every time she said a word. It was clear from the constant flow of mana from the surroundings and the circulation of magic power that the reason they were able to communicate with her was thanks to that pearl. Oh, curious about this? Xietain touched her forehead and said casually, "This is a treasure which sea creatures with intelligence can receive from the Lost City Vault. It's just that in the past, there was only an intelligent being born among our sea race once every 100 years, so when the evolution process began everything turned a bit messy. It was as if the sea princess had suddenly dropped her caution against the two humans on the bridge. However, it was clear from the way she kept her physical distance with the giant leviathan near her that she was actually not as unguarded as she might appear at first glance." Xietain and Shangyuan Bingshu looked at each other, and both saw the same sparkle in the other's gaze. However, just when the two were hoping to get more information from the princess's mouth, Xietain suddenly decided to stop the conversation there. Instead, she looked at Xietain and said with a smile, "Human leader. How about an exchange for holding this bridge steady for you and preventing the sea creatures in the area from attacking your troops in the moving process? You hand over that soul stone you obtained earlier to me." The expression on the face of Xietain changed slightly when he heard this, and his voice turned a tone colder as he slowly said, "Seventh Princess, don't make jokes. I think you should be aware of the value that a soul stone coming from a third-order living being has in this stage. Hand over the third-order soul stone? If someone wanted to take a treasure of such magnitude and importance out of his hands, then they would first have to meet face-to-face with Xietan's greatsword. He was definitely not willing to give up the soul stone. He had countless uses for it, and this was only the second third-order soul stone he obtained so far. Xietain frowned slightly and said softly, "I thought the bridge was important to you? I guess it's not so much if you're not willing to hand over that soul stone. Are you threatening me?" Xietan's voice turned dangerously cold as he said those words and unconsciously tightened his grip on his weapon. Shangyuan Bingshu reached out her hand and placed it over his as she frowned tightly. She was fully aware that although Xietain might appear kind in many situations and even fairly just and cruel to others and to himself, in reality, he was tremendously proud. If there was one thing that a man whose heart was filled to the brim with pride would never allow, it was threats, and Xietain was precisely that kind of man. However, in this kind of circumstance, it was true that Xietain and Shangyuan Bingshu were at a disadvantage. After all, the sea princess could simply sink underwater and destroy the bridge from below. If something like that were to happen, then both Xietain and Shangyuan Bingshu could only find a place to cry, since they would not only lose the bridge, but it would also be impossible for them to take revenge on Xietain unless they were both willing to take the risk of being devoured by some creature under the unknown waters, after submerging and losing a great deal of their overall strength. Threaten? Of course not. Why do you utter such an unpleasant word? Xietain smiled slightly, seemingly oblivious to the slight murderous intent in Xietan's gaze. She looked him straight in the eyes and said in an honest voice, "Human leader, no, Xietain. Xietain, just like your human race, my sea race is also experiencing difficulties at this moment. In fact, it could be said that the situation of the sea race is even worse than that of the human race from a certain point of view." Although Xietain had no idea what Xietain was going for, he listened to her as he took a deep breath and calmed down. He gently touched with his other hand the top of Shangyuan Bingshu's hand that was still resting on his right hand to indicate to her that he was fine now. Our sea race is separated into several kingdoms, and within those kingdoms, there are many princes and princesses in addition. Unlike you humans, the lowest soldiers of the sea race have no sense of intelligence, so they are difficult to control. Even within my family's realm, I am no more than Princess number 7, and often get attacked by my brothers and sisters in an attempt to eliminate a possible competitor. As much as I tried to explain to them that I am not interested in the throne of Lost City, none of them believe me. Xietain shook her head and sighed. The princess looked tired as she said in a soft voice, "Unlike the other princes and princesses, my only goal is to try to find a way to stop my people from killing each other just for food. But such a thing is not at all easy when I only control a small portion of water that, compared to the vast sea, is no different than a small pond." "Is that why you formed an alliance with the zombie leader and the beast leader? For food?" Xietain suddenly felt that he had caught something big, but just as he was about to catch it, it disappeared. It was a rare flash of inspiration that appeared out of nowhere, and just as quickly as it appeared it disappeared, leaving him extremely frustrated in his heart. "That's right." The mermaid princess did not hide anything as she nodded. "With 20 million zombies, I thought I could feed my 500,000 subordinates without a problem for at least 2 to 3 months, but it turned out I was naive." At the end of her monologue, Xietain had a bitter smile on her face, which made her look pitiful and gave her another kind of beauty that encouraged men to hug and comfort her. At first, the seventh princess, who had been branded as a fool by everyone and was even pushed aside by her father, thought she had found an opportunity to let her subordinates not have to kill each other. However, instead of getting what was expected, what Xietain ended up getting in return for forming an alliance with the zombies and beasts was the loss of just under 490,000 of her initial 500,000 or so soldiers. One needed to know that those 500,000 soldiers were all that Xietain had as the seventh princess. Now, she had basically lost everything, and this, coupled with the pain of losing so many of her people in just one night, naturally devastated her, even though she did not show it on the surface. Xietain fell into deep contemplation after hearing the words of the mermaid princess. No one knew what he was thinking. Shangyuan Bingshu seized the opportunity and interjected, "My name is Shangyuan Bingshu, second in command of the Transcendent faction under the leadership of the man beside me. Regarding the bridge, since what you want is only the zombie corpses, then how about we hand over all the corpses that belong to us according to the previous agreement, except for the soul stones?" Xietain raised his head slightly and noticed that the gaze of Xietain lit up slightly when she heard Shangyuan Bingshu's proposal. Indeed, the mermaid princess nodded without hesitation and said quickly, "You got a deal. I will see to it that this bridge stands at least until the time you pass along with your people, and I will also make sure that the surrounding sea creatures do not attack during that time. In return, the corpses of the 20 million zombies from blood to the smallest of fingernails belong to my race. Then we have a deal." Shangyuan Bingshu smiled faintly. Although there were some second-order zombies among the zombies and their bodies could be considered treasures, the truth was that neither Xietain nor anyone in their faction had a high enough level of blacksmithing to create some kind of weaponry using corpses that did not differ much from those of a human. Therefore, keeping those with them was a waste anyway. However, to the mermaid princess and her race, those corpses were a valuable food treasure. It was a win-win situation no matter which way you looked at it, since the soul stones of the corpses that were within the limit of the previous agreement would still belong to Xietain's faction.